My parents skipped my graduation for my brother's birthday, leaving me crushed. A year later, I received an award, and he asked, "How did you do it?" My name is Jackson, and I believe I now understand what it's like to entirely remove toxic individuals from your life. It didn't happen fast, and it required a lot of patience and careful preparation before I could stop feeling drained by my own family. Let's start with some background. I grew up in a family that, let's just say, favored my younger brother Oliver in ways that could not be ignored. From birthdays to academic accomplishments, weekend getaways to family dinners, everything focused around him. And if I ever tried to speak out or celebrate my own accomplishments, I was either rejected or made to feel bad for focusing on myself. The turning moment occurred at my college graduation. I worked my ass hard for hundreds of hours of studying, part-time jobs, and internships, and I graduated with honors. I sent out invites to my parents, brother, and a few relatives. I hoped that this time they would show up. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Instead, my mom texted me the morning of the ceremony. "Sorry, Jackson. We cannot make it. Don't forget Oliver's birthday meal next month. It is a major event, and you are expected to attend." No congrats. No acknowledgement of my efforts. Just a reminder that my brother's event was somehow more significant. I did not go. I stayed at home, strolled around the vacant apartment I had been renting near university, and felt a mixture of rage, hurt, and relief. In that moment, I recognized that my parents would not change. They weren't going to suddenly recognize me as someone worthy of celebration. For the following 6 months, I had no communication. I prioritized myself, my work, and my mental health. I threw myself into a project I'd been working on for years, a software business idea that I felt might make a difference. I did not inform anyone in my family. I did not need their approval or affirmation. Meanwhile, Oliver maintained his ideal life trajectory. At least that's how they depicted it. My parents were always gloating on social media about his promotions, parties, and trips. Every message served as a reminder that the family had determined who deserved attention and who did not. Then came the unexpected twist. 10 months later, I was asked to speak at a major awards event in my profession. Something I never dreamed would happen to me. The night of the event, I stood backstage with my heart beating. Not from anxiety, but because I was finally living my life on my own terms. That's when I spotted my brother, Oliver. My parents were not with him this time. It was just him, and he seemed surprised and perplexed. His expression was a combination of amazement and dread. He'd heard about the prizes, but seeing them in person was different. How? How did he accomplish that? I could hear him muttering under his breath as he watched me walk on stage. I did not turn around. I did not want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I had observed. But that expression of astonishment, wonder, and even terror was worth more than any applause in the room. I got up to the stage, took the prize, and gave my speech. The audience was engaged, clapping and really interested. Meanwhile, my brother stayed in the back, twisting his hands and attempting to figure out what went wrong. After the ceremony, I did not hurry to rejoice. I enjoyed a nice meal with a few close friends who had helped me get through the long nights and difficult months of establishing my enterprise. It was simple, a tiny, comfortable table, laughing from shared stories, and a sense of achievement. It was the perfect night for me. Calm, gratifying, and all mine. But my phone kept buzzing. At first I dismissed it, figuring it was a usual congrats from coworkers. But then I understood it wasn't. It was a mix of unfamiliar numbers and some familiar ones that I hadn't seen in over 6 months. My mother's, father's, and Jarrett's phone numbers. The texts were uncomfortable, even regretful in tone, but clearly intended to investigate rather than actually check in. My mother's first text message was, "Jackson, we saw the news. Congratulations. We should talk soon." There was no mention of pride or the reality that they had constantly picked my brother above me. Just a thinly disguised attempt to reinsert themselves into my life. Oliver, of course, fared worse. His texts were a combination of incredulity and disguised menace. Only someone who has grown up in a sheltered environment could perceive this as subtle. "Jackson, this is remarkable. I didn't think you had it. We should meet up. Perhaps I may help you expand. Please help me expand." I had to laugh. He had spent his whole life riding on the coattails of our parents' preferences. And then he started behaving like he had authority over me. I did not react. Not yet. I wanted to appreciate the moment, the recognition of what I had accomplished without them, without his assistance, and despite all of the years of neglect. The following several weeks were intriguing. My relatives began making tiny, creeping attempts to enter my life without actually being present. My parents somehow learned about my company's early clients and began making polite calls to inquire about how I was handling things. They did not inquire about my personal life. They didn't ask if I was pleased. They wanted to see whether I could be exploited. Oliver started attending industry gatherings. Not officially, of course. He'd be at the back of the room, lurking, attempting to appear casual but failing terribly. He cornered me outdoors at my last networking meal. "I just don't get it," he muttered, his voice low and anxious, as if he feared someone else might hear him. "How did you do all of this without us? Without Mom and Dad?" I let the quiet linger. He expected me to defend myself, explain my techniques and make him feel less tiny. But I did not. I simply stated, I focused on the work that mattered to me, the kind that makes a difference, not the kind that earns approval from people who consistently dismissed me. His expression contorted, a mix of fury and recognition. For the first time, he realized that he had nothing that I couldn't get, and more significantly, he hadn't earned anything. Everything he had ever accomplished was due to favoritism, and suddenly he realized the rules had changed. Meanwhile, my parents began using subtle manipulative methods. My mother phoned, not to congratulate me, but to suggest about family commitments and possibilities that were clearly intended to benefit Oliver. My father sent me emails regarding financial methods that would interest me, but each sentence meant that without their leadership, I would fail. At first, I considered ignoring them completely, but as they attempted to implant themselves, I realized I could use it to my advantage. Not in a hasty, impetuous way, but cautiously, strategically. I could allow them to continue underestimating me while I quietly developed, worked and gained credibility. They didn't realize that I had spent years studying their strategies, understanding how they controlled people, and that I could now predict every move. Then came the day when the firm received its first substantial public recognition. A major magazine was promoting creative companies, and my company featured on the cover. I knew my folks would see it eventually. Social media and industry news are difficult to escape. I also knew Oliver would hear about it and likely behave rashly. I was correct. My brother's frenzied texting began as soon as the magazine reached digital newsstands. "Jackson, halt. This is too much. How are you doing this without assistance? Why haven't you told us? This is not fair." Fair. He really had the arrogance to use the term fair. After all those years of favoritism, mistreatment, and being encouraged to settle for less, my accomplishments suddenly seemed unjust to him. I smiled silently, enjoying the moment, knowing that the next stages would take patience. This was the lull before the storm, and I could already sense worry creeping in. Oliver's ego was crumbling, and my parents realized that their typical techniques were not going to succeed. And then, just when I thought I could quietly celebrate my win, something unexpected happened at the next industry gala. Oliver arrived uninvited just as I was being introduced for another award. But this time, he was not alone. He had invited someone I didn't recognize, a high-profile investor whom he had somehow persuaded to attend. He stood there, smirking, a combination of phony charm and terror. "Jackson, perhaps we can speak after the wedding. I believe I can help you scale quicker." I glanced at him and saw the despair in his eyes. He still didn't get it. He still didn't comprehend that I didn't need him, I didn't need them, and that any attempt to influence me now would simply expose their flaws. I nodded nicely, collected the medal, and smiled to the audience. But within, I was already planning. It was no longer about proving myself to them. It was about demonstrating that years of neglect, partiality, and manipulation had unintended repercussions. The gala that night seemed strange. I had attended a couple of similar gatherings previously, but this one had a distinct vibe. Normally, I would have been anxious standing under the bright lights in front of a gathering of investors, journalists, and IT entrepreneurs. But tonight, my concentration was sharper. I was intensely aware of the folks lurking in the background, the ones who should have supported me all along but instead chose to undercut or disregard my accomplishments. Oliver stood out like a sore thumb. He tried to hide his unease with a false grin while standing near a table where a major investor had taken a seat. I didn't know the investor directly, but Oliver plainly believed that proximity may provide him with power. The boldness of it made my chest clench, not in anger, but in anticipation. I knew he was overreaching, and I was eager to see how far he would go. The evening proceeded, and I received a few more plaudits. A panel discussion emphasized my company's innovative approach to addressing a long-standing industry issue. As I talked, I felt Oliver's gaze on me. No, not admiration. He wasn't capable of it, but he had a flash of worry, as if he was trying to figure out how to interfere without being silly. It was almost comical if not for the years of entitlement it revealed. After the session I moved away to greet a few colleagues. That's when I felt his shadow approach. "Jackson, might we talk?" Oliver's voice sounded extremely nonchalant, yet it had an edge. The type of edge that only comes from someone who is afraid of losing control. I hesitated, smiled politely, and nodded. Sure, let's go outside." He removed his mask once we were in a quieter hallway away from the crowd. His gaze darted about, agitated, even panicked. "Listen, I don't understand how you did this. 1 year ago, you weren't even on our radar. Now you're gaining national recognition, honors, and financial interest. How?" I gave a quiet laugh. I concentrated on what was important to me. I stopped seeking approval from those who repeatedly underestimated me and began completing the task. "I suppose that is something you would not comprehend. You've always looked to your parents for advice, opportunity, and a support network." He flinched in response, a small but revealing gesture. "It's not like that," he answered defensively, but the trembling in his voice betrayed him. "Perhaps you had some luck, connections and timing. I can help you. Billy, if we work together, you could grow quicker." I shook my head gently, allowing the stillness to linger for a time. "I don't need your help, nor do I need theirs." His jaw hardened. I could almost see the gears spinning in his mind, trying to make sense of a world where he didn't have an edge. "Jackson, you don't get it," he continued, his voice rising slightly, though he attempted to conceal it. "Mom and Dad, they can open doors. You need them. You'll reach a plateau without them. You'll hit walls you can't break on your own." I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone is completely miscalculating you. "I've spent years breaking walls without anyone's help, and every time you relied on them, I watched and learned." The look on his face was priceless: confusion, panic, and a growing realization that he had underestimated me in every way. He wanted to storm off to regroup, but he lingered as if hoping I'd stumble and need him. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, my parents were also watching from a distance. They had arrived late, clearly trying to make a dramatic entrance, dressed impeccably, and smiling as if they had just stumbled upon success by accident. My father's expression was a mix of irritation and disbelief, as if he couldn't understand why I was thriving on my own. My mother's eyes kept flickering to me, as they did when she was evaluating Oliver for some perceived flaw. This was the first time I realized something significant. Their control had always been an illusion. All these years they had twisted, belittled and channeled energy toward whoever they deemed merited attention, but they had failed to account for one thing. I had been silently generating momentum outside of their influence, without the need for validation or acceptance. And now, standing in front of them, I could see it slowly dawning on them. Later that evening at the reception, I was approached by several key figures from my field who were genuinely impressed with my work. While I was speaking with them, Oliver hovered nearby, attempting unsuccessfully to insert himself into the conversations. He tried to draw attention to himself by name-dropping, but it was clumsy and transparent. Every gesture, every word screamed panic and desperation. At one point, I noticed him leaning toward my parents, whispering something. They nodded. Their expressions carefully neutral, but slightly strained. It was clear they were scheming, trying to figure out how to leverage me now that I was undeniable. I smiled to myself. As the night drew to a close, Oliver approached me one last time. I had patience now, something they never gave me growing up, and I would give them the impression that they had a chance to regain control, assert influence, and manipulate me, only to show them how powerless they truly were. "Jackson, you don't understand what's at stake. If we work together, you could go even further. Think about it." I tilted my head, keeping my tone calm and measured. "I've thought about it, Oliver. And I've decided there's nothing you or our parents can offer me that I need, but I'm interested in seeing how far your desperation will take you." His face turned pale. That's when I understood I'd actually reached a watershed moment. It wasn't simply about proving myself anymore. This was about seeing them deal with the repercussions of a lifetime of entitlement, favoritism, and neglect. The weeks after the gala were a slow burn. I did not lash out. I did not write a theatrical email or create an embarrassing discussion. That would have been too simple. Furthermore, I had discovered that my parents and Oliver thrived on impetuous behavior. They fed on spectacle because it allowed them to change the story. I wanted something calmer, more methodical that would fall solidly and leave little space for their normal spin. First, I tightened up the business. I stopped accepting meetings that were just flattering and began saying yes only to those that helped take things ahead. I recruited a modest public relations specialist who understood nuance. Someone who could create a picture that did not shout, "Look at me," but rather presented facts so plainly that the truth had no option but to reveal itself. I extended collaborations with a handful of institutions and a nonprofit that shared the product's objective. The goal was to establish credibility in places where my parents had never looked, and to construct a network based on actual influence rather than familial relationships. Second, I watched, not in a sinister sense, but as a scientist seeing a theory play out. Oliver continued to make boneheaded actions that only someone cushioned by continual parental rescue could do. He attempted to warm up to possible partners, offered to link individuals he hardly knew, and made great gestures at local gatherings. He couldn't go more than a meeting or two without turning to one of the old techniques, such as name-dropping mom, referring to shared family achievements that didn't exist, or relying on sympathy. Longtime business veterans could smell it from a mile away. My parents were more sinister. They began volunteering for panels on which I was involved, as well as offering to arrange charity dinners in my sector. They spoke with local media sources about how proud they were of Oliver, always Oliver. Their statements were strategic, ignoring the fact that their oldest son had recently been featured in a national tech publication. They wanted the appearance of support without any genuine participation. It was as if they were attempting to project an idealized image of themselves onto my existence, one in which they were important. They had no clue how foolish they looked. I devised a method that didn't include embarrassing them for the purpose of it. This was about the truth and accountability. If you neglect someone for years and then try to reintegrate them after they've shown themselves, such conduct will have consequences. You cannot create a moral ledger. I intended to reveal their pattern in a calm, professional, and impactful manner, mirroring the approaches they used against me. The chance arose when a large industry symposium invited my business to deliver a case study on stage. This was not a vanity event. The audience would include academic partners, possible clients, and most crucially, some of the civic groups that my parents want to woo for their generous image. I reserved a larger space, organized a live demo, and most importantly, planned for a short documentary-style montage to play at the conclusion of the presentation. The montage was created using recorded conversations with people who have benefited from the product. A small-town school director who used our resources to transform after-school programming. A healthcare coordinator who has lowered wait times. A few early adopters who observed meaningful results. There will be no name-calling or dramatization, only impact testimonials. But I also had another tune. Over the last 6 months, I'd spoken with a few trustworthy acquaintances and former classmates who remembered details my parents had tried to conceal. They skipped the graduation, never went to the scholarship banquet, and rejected me from family gatherings. I asked these folks politely and respectfully if they would be prepared to participate in one short piece that detailed what happened. I kept it as factual and emotion-free as possible, including dates, missed events, statements from my parents, and social media updates that always promoted Oliver while ignoring me. It read like a dossier, and it was backed up by receipts, past invites, screenshots, even a few of social media postings my parents had forgotten about. I realized how vicious that sounded on paper, but my goal was not to exact retribution for the sake of it. It was intended to demand a public accounting. If they wish to re-establish themselves today, they should be prepared to answer the question, what did your favoritism cost? What were the repercussions of constantly choosing spectacle above support? I wanted a response that could not be altered by family group chat conversations or softened by smiling images. Weeks of preparation have passed. I practiced my presentation until it was second nature. I scrutinized the montage until every clip had a purpose. I ensured that the nonprofit executives and educational partners in the room knew what I was doing. Not as a personal assault, but rather as an example of what happens when societies overlook brilliance in favor of ease. My public relations representative wrote a balanced news release that described the occasion as a case study and social impact reveal. Nothing about family turmoil or sensationalism. If the press took up on what happened, that's good. If they don't, that's okay. The information may stand on its own. When the day arrived, the room was alive with the quiet hum of professionals exchanging cards and coffee cups clinking. I observed as individuals found their seats, and a few faces I recognized from previous occasions took their places. I noticed my folks in the rear, on a row with an easy exit. They looked perfect. My mother wore a fitted dress, while my father had a clean haircut reserved for official appearances. Oliver stood alongside them, uncomfortable and watchful, like an understudy waiting for his cue. They all stared at anybody passing by with pride, as if they were family. I felt nothing but cold resolve. I delivered the presentation with a consistent pace, emphasizing KPIs and user stories while asking rhetorical questions to make the technical parts understandable to a general audience. People leaned forwards. They wrote notes. The demo worked flawlessly. There are no glitches. And the applause at the conclusion was real, as opposed to the artificial politeness that occasionally occurs after technical presentations. That was significant. I wanted the applause to be for me and my work, not for family theater. Then, as intended, I showed the montage. I kept my voice even. We've built this to help communities where talent is overlooked, I corrected myself. But there's a lesson here that's not about technology. It's about what we overlook when we value spectacle over substance. The lights lowered, and the screen filled with faces, instructors, coordinators and users, each expressing how the product had benefited them in their own words. The montage then transitioned effortlessly. The tone did not shift. The substance merely got narrower. It included invites, a graduation invitation with RSVP lists, a social media post praising Oliver but disregarding my degree, a brief video of my parents at an event where they delivered a speech about family values, and audio of them denying a call I made the morning of my graduation. The sculpture displayed the dates alongside each item. It was systematic, chilly, and obvious. I watched Oliver's expression as the montage progressed across the chronology. At first, he blinked, bewildered. Then his mouth became a tight line. He grabbed for my mother's hand, seeking comfort. My parents' grins wavered. They weren't used to being shown proof in public. Their domain was private rewriting. The room became quieter, not because the picture was amazing, but because the pattern it displayed was plain and simple to grasp. When the final frame faded to black, I grabbed the microphone again. I did not accuse. I did not give a sermon. I merely asked one question. If we're serious about supporting talent, what do we do when someone in our community is repeatedly overlooked by their own family? How do we ensure the next Jackson has support from their earliest moments? The question was polite, even scholarly, and that was the purpose. It prompted a bigger discussion. It provided space for reflection. But, before the panel could begin the open debate, I sensed a presence behind me, a familiar tightness that set my jaw. Oliver had stood up. He strode through the rows like someone who had practiced wrath in secret, the kind of controlled outrage he'd used to deflect blame at family gatherings. He approached the platform and began speaking in a clear voice. "That's enough, Jackson," he said. "You made this about Dad and Mom, although they had nothing to do with it. You're twisting things for attention." The room moved, as conversations fluctuated between surprise and interest. My mother stood slowly, her cheeks heated in a manner that didn't match the cool serenity she'd maintained all night. My father's countenance tightened, protective and skeptical. I could have stepped back, let them retort, and let the family narrative try to smooth the montage with charm and effect. But I'd spent months building a moment that would not be undone by the same old tactics. I looked at Oliver, then at my parents, and quietly said, "If you want to say something, please do. Say that to everyone in this room. Not to me in private. Explain why you missed my graduation and why my job is less essential than a supper for Oliver. Say it now." Oliver's jaw twitched. He opened and closed his mouth. My mother's hand trembled where it grasped my father's sleeve. Cameras clicked from surrounding tables. A few attendees went for their phones. I could feel the air changing. Oliver swallowed and then, in a way that would decide everything, began speaking. His opening words were exactly what my parents had always relied on. Charm, plausible deniability, and an appeal to a crowd that preferred neat explanations over uncomfortable truths. He framed my montage as an overreach, an attempt to weaponize family against them, and he called it unfair. I listened calmly, allowing him to build his case. He was articulate enough to sway someone who didn't know the backstory, but he didn't account for one thing. I had prepared for this. I had lined up a few quiet allies in the audience, people who had seen Oliver's half-hearted attempts to attach himself to projects and who would not let a performance rewrite history. I had also arranged for a copy of the montage to be distributed to several of our attendees, and most importantly, I had a final piece that I hadn't shown yet, something I kept back precisely because of the drama it would cause if released impulsively. As Oliver's voice grew more insistent, the first of those allies rose, followed by another. A few individuals at the front desks began asking clarifying questions about dates, invites, and access, and the debate that ensued was no longer within Oliver's control. It was a parsing of evidence, an interrogation by experts seeking clarification rather than drama. My mother made eye contact with me for the first time that night, and I could see a flicker of something like calculation followed by fear. She began to speak softly at first, then louder, offering an explanation that attempted to reframe years into a single misstep. It was practiced and tidy. At that very time, the lights in the seminar hall dropped again, and someone in the AV booth, on my signal, loaded up one final film. I observed my mother's expression as the screen lighted up behind her. She'd been honing her tale for decades for family, friends, and community leaders. The 30-second film began with an old voice call she had left for someone else years ago, unaware that the audio had been kept and authenticated. The message was casual, even commonplace, but it featured a remark she had never stated in public. "We can't spoil him. He must understand the importance of not being given everything." The context was quite ordinary, but to the audience, it read like proof, a candid admission that there had been a pattern of privilege and managed narratives. My mother's lips parted, my father's face lost its practiced calm, Oliver's eyes darted between his parents and me, and the room held its breath. I had one more thing cued. The montage's timeline was tied to a single unmistakable fact in one final frame. The date of the graduation invitation was shown next to the social post where my parents celebrated Oliver's latest party. The juxtaposition was simple and brutal, requiring only acknowledgement rather than apologies. With the projector slowly humming and the audience's attention absorbed, Oliver took a step forward. His countenance was a mixture of desperation and something else, genuine. Fear, I assumed. He lifted his hand as if to stop the reel. "You can't do that, Jackson. This isn't," he started, but his words faltered beneath the weight of the room's quiet. My finger hovered over the remote. The next clip was cued and ready. A short private recording of a family dinner where my parents laughed about how well Oliver was doing and how Jackson was always the quiet one, as if quietness equated to lesser potential. It was small, almost throwaway footage, but in this context, it would be the closing chord. It would prompt a question that no one could nicely reframe. What do you do with people you ignore? I could push play, let the film run, and see their faces unfold in real time. I could see Oliver's confidence crumble into something thin and raw. I could see my parents struggle to save themselves with old defenses that no longer fit. I sat there, remote warm in my hand, feeling the gravity of the moment. The room leaned in. Oliver's breath hitched. My mom's eyes flashed something like panic. My father's jaw clenched. People murmured, some reaching for their phones, others looking at the stage as if the next action might change their perception of the entire family. I had taught myself to be calm, patient, and truthful, but as the second lengthened, I realized I had arrived at the very place I had been working toward for months. The question was not if I would expose them, but how. I pressed the button, the projector clicked, and the final clip rolled, leaving the room completely silent. The footage showed my parents at that family dinner years ago, laughing and clinking glasses as they discussed Oliver's latest accomplishment while dismissing me casually. Oliver's face paled, and he took a step back, as if the air itself had suddenly become too heavy to breathe. The words were simple, almost conversational, but in context they were damning. It wasn't just favoritism, it was systematic neglect repeated over years and documented in black and white. My parents were transfixed as well, their polished grins replaced by astonishment and barely veiled dread. My mother's hands trembled as she grasped my father's sleeve, and my father's mouth clenched into a stiff line of incredulity. They had always assumed they could manipulate appearances, smooth over their mistakes with charm and selective storytelling, but this time, the truth was unavoidable. The audience murmured softly, not in mockery, but in the quiet recognition of evidence laid bare. They weren't judging me. They were judging the entitlement system in which I had grown up, and the system had cracks that couldn't be patched. I stepped forward and lowered the remote. "This isn't about retribution," I replied calmly, addressing the crowd. "It's about realizing that talent that has been missed, or worse, overlooked for preference, will find a way to thrive. And when that happens, history cannot be altered." I turned to face my parents. And Oliver directly. You had the opportunity to support me, encourage me, or even recognize my efforts. You decided not to. The repercussions of that choice are what you're witnessing today. My parents tried to respond at the same time. My father's voice was tight and guarded. Jackson, that wasn't the case. We didn't. I raised my hand to stop him. Save it. I've chronicled everything, publicly and privately. It does not matter anymore. This is not for you to spin. You can't undo what has happened. Oliver eventually found his voice, but it was a hoarse whisper of desperation. Jackson, we can solve this. Just let me. No. I replied firmly. There is nothing to mend. You will not manipulate me or anybody else here. You will not pretend that this never occurred. You had years to assist me. You decided not to. That's the truth. By this point, several audience members had quietly started recording, while others were nodding to each other and whispering comments about accountability and the consequences of neglect. The moment had shifted, and it was no longer a family spat, but a lesson in entitlement and its limits. My parents left shortly after, flustered and visibly shaken. Oliver lingered for a moment, looking like he was about to argue, but he realized there was no way to regain control. The rest of the attendees, friends, colleagues and partners, offered congratulations and expressed admiration, not only for my work, but also for the courage it took to expose the pattern with clarity and professionalism. There was no drama, no shouting, just undeniable truth. Oliver, on the other hand, began quietly withdrawing from the industry circles where he had hoped to capitalize on my success. My parents tried to reach out, first with apologies, then with attempts to charm, and finally with veiled criticisms disguised as concern, but I remained firm. No contact, no forgiveness, and no manipulation would succeed anymore. His attempts to network via my contacts failed because others recognized the pattern of entitlement and understood he hadn't earned anything. In the meantime, I concentrated only on development, and my firm grew quicker than I expected. Investors came forward impressed not only by the technology, but also by the founder's integrity. I hired a small, trusted team that valued substance over appearance, effort and results over charm and manipulation, and my life was no longer measured by their approval or my parents' shifting standards. 1 year later, when my firm secured its first significant national contract, I received a quick text from Oliver. Jackson, how did you do it? I didn't react. I didn't need to. He already knew the answer, and more significantly, so did my parents, who had lost the narrative, lost control, and were finally facing the repercussions of a lifetime of entitlement and neglect. The situation is now clear. I am thriving, independent, and unassailable in my field. My parents are estranged, their image tarnished in the circles that matter. Oliver is floundering, struggling to navigate a world where he has no unearned leverage. I have no desire to reconcile, and I have no intention of forgiving. The lesson is complete, and the truth is undeniable. In my situation, the repercussions of ignoring, undervaluing, or choosing entitlement over work were severe, and I now feel liberated.